Hello and welcome back to the next One Piece review and discussion. We are here with the sort of epilogue chapter that is tying up the end of the God Valley incident, as well as moving into what is probably the final one or two chapters of the flashback. We are seeing more things happening on Elbaf, leading into what will be the jumping off point back to present day, where Loki is still telling this whole story to Hyrule and Luffy. So, really interesting to see in this chapter what actually happens with certain characters and certain characters who've interacted for the first time ever. So, let's get into this. Without further ado, chapter 1166, New Tales. And there is no cover story this week, but we have a beautiful autumn colour spread, which is really well done. Nice to see a colour spread every now and again. But last we had left off, it was the fight between Rox, Garp, and Roger, who had teamed up to obviously take on Rox, and it was this huge battle because Rox had become this demonic version of himself thanks to Eames' ability, and he had begged them using the voice of all things to persuade the two of them that he needed to die. He had to die here, and they were the ones who had to take him out. And it was this really emotional, sort of driven fight between the three of them because they could see he was crying. He was not as he looked, but he was still on a rampage. He was still attacking everything and anyone. And they knew this wasn't Rox. They knew something was wrong and they knew he was hurting. And they put all of their energy and all of their haki into one attack. So we'd had Roger trying to explain this, where he was like, I'm using Conquerors, but it's not working. And Garp was like, look, wake up. He's also using Conquerors. So the only way to overcome that is to have a one out, all out attack to overcome his defenses. So the chapter ended ultimately with these two giant attacks from Garp and Roger, who put Rox out of his misery. And there was other little things throughout the chapter. We had obviously the introduction of Marco's dad, Pologram. There was the life debt that Big Mum swore with Kaido, because he stole the devil fruit, and that was still very funny how he did it. And we had the confirmation from Ian to Saturn and probably anyone else that this island was to be eradicated, erased from history. And we pick up in the aftermath of that battle. Rox is on the floor, so is Garp and Roger. It is just a wasteland. And Rox is starting to kind of become lucid again, or at least his thoughts are tracking now, and he's like, I need to stay alive. This island is my homeland. They've broken the curse that was put on me. They've done it. And then he looks up, and Garling, Summer, and Satchel, all three God's Knights members who have arrived here, are walking towards Rox. And it's so heartbreaking because it's so well done. It's raining. They're just these three ominous shadows at first that just emerge closer. And all Rox can think of in this moment, he sees, oh, it's too late for me now. But he doesn't want Roger and Garp to die here. These are his final moments, his final words in this internal monologue to himself and these thoughts. He's like, oh yeah, there was one more thing I wanted to say to the two of you. Thank you for stopping me. Now, we've got the parallel now of when Ace was like, thank you for loving me. Rox is like, thank you for stopping me. And then Garling is the one to land the blow. Rock is down anyway, but he's the one who thrust the sword into Rox to kill him. And immediately we see that while the God's Knight might have been focused on Rox at this moment, Rayleigh and Gabon had managed to scoop up Roger and Garp and flee. Like, they are booking it, and they are just trying to get to the ships. And Roger and Garp are kind of coming to in this moment, and their only concern is how's Rox? Like, what happened to Rox? And even Garth's wondering, and like Gabon's like, look, we're enemies here. Like, why are you worried about your enemy here? And it's finally Rayleigh who's the one to speak up. Was like, he was killed, and this whole island is collapsing. We need to move, and it is the narrator saying, the events that would leave a mark on the history books because it was removed from history. Like, this event didn't happen, but there was still a lot of like shadows and a lot of people who knew about it, and the island was consumed by fog. And like the curtains closing, it says that was the essence of the God Valley incident, but not before a massive bolt of lightning split the heaven, and with that it opened up the new stage, or the new curtains and the new tales that would unfold from this event. And we see kind of all the major surviving players that go on to become, so infamous. And we get that scene where we knew it was coming. Roger's awake now, he's still all bandaged up, and they're back on the ship, and they're all happy. Rayleigh and Shaki are there together, and everyone's having fun. We see Gloriosa in the back, and we see everyone is excited because they held off from opening the chests until Roger was like awake. Gotta wait for the captain first. Let the captain open up the treasure chest. But as he approaches, they start to hear noises from inside the chest, and lo and behold, we saw it depicted, but this is it now in the proper manga of the main story. He clicks it open. They all look inside to see baby Shanks had found his way in and onto this ship. So we're now in the main canon seeing Shanks, how he managed to become a part of the Roger Pirates, which is really cool to see, actually. But Morgan does his thing, and news gets spread across the world that not about the God Valley incident, but that Rox had been defeated, or the Rox pirates themselves had been wiped out. And predictably, it had been falsified. And it is that, obviously, we've known about it for many, many years, that Garp was hailed as the hero of that event. And he vanquished Rox, and everyone's saying, like, Garp's the strongest now. Like, this Vice Admiral Garp, he's the one who's going to protect us. He's a hero. And he is livid. Like, back at Navy HQ, he's tearing up the newspaper. He's like, when I get a hold of Morgan's, like, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. He is absolutely livid with how it's been depicted. But Sengoku's here, and he's like, look, the world government and the Marines are a massive organisation, so obviously they've paid Morgan's off, and quite considerably. Think about it, Garp. With the member of, like, nation armies, with the force of the Marines, like, we're talking, like, tens of millions of soldiers. Is Oda starting to tease now what the final battle could look like here? Talking about, if people were to side with the world government, the scale that the Straw Hats and other pirates who form an alliance are up against. And he's like, look, it is impossible to account for everyone's actions and motivations, but I will tell you this. If the top brass ever do strike me as insane, I'm going to simply turn a blind eye. And Garp stands up and, like, starts punching him and, like, pulls him close. He's like, what did you just say? He's like, don't be, like, promotion chasing. So this is really, we didn't get a lot of Sengoku's, like, well, we got some of his philosophies through like Marineford and like, you know, times where he was the fleet admiral. You know, he worked his way up. But the fact that he's very adamant here, saying, you know, he doesn't want to end up like at the bottom of the cliff, you know, what can you do there? He wanted to work his way up to have more of a say. But even then he's like, he's aware of the corruption that could happen at the top end of the world government, and he would just simply turn a blind eye to it just because the odds are so against them because of the massive organization that they are. And Sengoku's like, are you really like gonna stay where you are? Like, are you gonna quit? Like, what's going on? And he's like, no, the people at the bottom of that cliff that you're talking about still need a guard dog. So Garp here is like protecting like those lower ranks. He's protecting the men, and that's so admirable from him because he's seen the corruption. He's seen the monsters that rule this world, and as angry as he is against it, his only concern is protecting those men, and that is so Garp. But this is where we jump over to Elbaf briefly, and we see Loki and Rox talking in the underworld, and we see, you know, that flashback we've seen many times of Loki constantly trying to join Rox's crew, and Rox is like, look, I've got Harold's kid who won't leave me alone, and I've got the guy I actually want to join who won't give me the time of day. He's just like, I can't win here. And Loki says, you know what, Rox, I think you're Nika, you know, the warrior of liberation who will destroy the world, while laughing. And Rox is like, me? Destroy it? No, like, you've got the wrong idea. I'm aiming to be the king of the world. So interesting that Rox isn't trying to destroy the world. He just wanted to rule. He wanted to be the king of the world. So he's not got that sort of power, he says, but he says someone who does is Harold. He says, look, out there are the Galli-Ra, you know, those giants that are encased, those band of Ravengers are slumbering out there somewhere, and they can only be put back into play by Harold. He's like, I'm going to continue rallying all the rogues of this world, but could you imagine a team up between me and your dad? Like, who could possibly stop us? And I think that's the parallel between Luffy and Loki. I think when we come back to present day and Loki and Luffy team up, who's going to stop them? Do you know what I mean? Like, this is Oda trying to give the hint, like, a super powerful individual and a super powerful giant who could potentially, you know, raise this Galli-Ra from their slumber. Loki's in love with this idea as a kid, but this is something that could happen in the future. But we see the brief depictions play out of seasons passing, and it is Loki reading the news and beginning to just cry and bawl of Rox's death. And a very different reaction to this death is somewhere on a certain island, we have Harold absolutely bloodying another giant for stealing, for being corrupt in some way, and he is exacting anger and vengeance on this dude for how he is acting. And people are like, whoa, like, Harold, like, this is crazy. And the dude is like, look, I'm sorry, King, I won't steal from humans again. Like, and he's just like, you just don't get it, do you? Trash like you are responsible for the terrors of our race's history. You know, we can't be trusted. They only look at us in a certain way. You know, we are trying to be peaceful. And he's just like, you've jeopardized everything. And then there's a moment in that rage where it like goes over to Harold, like it zooms in, and he's actually just in tears because he's not really angry with this dude to a degree. He's more angry at himself because he had a moment with Rox before he let him go to God Valley. He didn't help his friend. He literally says, I forsook my closest friend. He was like begging for aid, and I just let him go and die. Like, this is something Harold is now living with, and he is struggling. And he's realising the weight of that decision. So he's like, there's no turning back, I will never forgive a giant who does evil. He is done with that. And we see that the Giant King has now lost it. He's gone mad. And before we go back to Harold, this kind of gets added in. We jump back over to Navy HQ. And for the first time in the One Piece manga, we have Garp and Dragon interacting, at least for 5 seconds. It's crazy. They have at least 2 lines of conversation, and all it is Garp being like knocking on Dragon's cell. Obviously he's been captured and since been thrown in jail for his actions, and he says to Garp that he's going to quit the Marines. He's done with the Marines, and he looks at Garp. He's like, you know what? I despise you as well. And all Garp is saying is like, okay. No other response, just agreeing, just okay. And then he drops a key into the cell. So he lets Dragon escape and then goes off to form the Revolutionaries. But to think we're 20 plus years into this manga and father and son have interacted for the first time, kind of crazy. But the chapter concludes in a phenomenal way. So back on Elbaf, Harold has declared, he's made up his mind, either Ja Rule, I don't care about appearances anymore now, I'm done. He's like, Hyrule and Loki, you are both my precious sons. Please get along while I'm gone. I want you to work together. And then we go over back to Marine HQ, we're back and forth here. And we see Harold Chip approaching. He brushes past all of the guards. He gets up to the gates and he's like, the high-ranking members of the Marines, the world government, you are to hear me out now. And this is where he grabs both his horns and snaps them off. And he places them down and he's like, I will atone for the 1,000 years of sin that my ancestry has caused, for the wrongs the giants have committed. The children of Elbaf are being raised without harming others and will someday be hand in hand with humanity. He's like, I am going to prove our unwavering commitment to peace, and I will do whatever it takes, even if it means becoming a slave. And that's where it ends. Eames' eye is the final panel, and that is what Eames wanted, a susceptible leader, a giant of all things, to use as a pawn or a slave in some way to enact the world of Mu. So we've got no break next week. I think we're going to get the rest of the play out here from Harold's side of, how he ends up being killed in the throne room. But ultimately we are not far away from going back to present day Elbaf, so it's going to be very interesting to see. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this chapter, and I will see you guys next time.